Hi, my name is Yitzchak Etshalom, and I'm delighted to be studying the Haftara with you every week. We're going to take a look at the text of the Haftarah as read in the Aleppo community every Shabbat. And for this introductory session, I'd rather take a look at the establishment of the Haftarah, where it came from, what the particular parameters of it are, and why it is that there are indeed many different customs as to which Haftarot are read on which particular Shabbatot of the year. As you can see here, the phenomenon of prophecy, which is critical to and central to the issue of the Haftarah, is something that was established already at Har Sinai. Moshe, as we see here in this passage in Dvarim, when Moshe is saying farewell to the people, he's reminding them that they're coming into a land in which the people there practice necromancy and horoscopes and all sorts of other attempts to find out what God's will is. And he says, that's not our way. That's all prohibited. Rather, God has promised, as you can see in this passage, that he will raise up a prophet just like me, a regular person, not so regular, but a person, through whom he will speak, and it is your job to listen to him. The section of Tanakh known as Nevi'im includes really two parts. It includes 4 books which are a history, Yehoshua, Shoftim, Shmuel, and Malachim, and it includes 4 books which are collections of prophetic rhetoric, Yeshayahu, Yirmiyahu, Yechezkel, and the Treasar, the 12 small books of Nevi'im that are in one book, and those 8 books together comprise Nevi'im. And it is through studying that material, through listening to that material, through experiencing that material, that we continue to hear HaKadosh Baruch Hu's voice as he spoke to Bnei Israel through the generations and explained how particular mitzvot have to be reemphasized. Particular mitzvot, there is an angle of them that perhaps they weren't aware of that they now need to understand, and to strengthen them in their commitment to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And so what we do on Shabbat morning and on Yom Tov morning and on fast days in the afternoon, in some communities, Yom Kippur in the afternoon, is we have a reading of the Torah that's followed by a reading from the Nevi'im. And our task in this shiur over the course of this year is to not only study the text of the Haftarah, but see how it connects to the reading of the Torah that it follows. One important point about the Haftarah. As I mentioned, we're going to be studying the Haftarot as they are practiced in the Syrian community. That is a very strange thing to say because Haftarot are part of Halakha. We would assume that they're practiced the same way everywhere, but they're not. The original establishment of the Haftarot, as we will see in a moment, is quite old. However, the particular text selected to be read as a Haftarah is something that developed over the centuries, and much of that development happened after Jews had already moved to different countries, and as such, different communities adopted different texts to use as their Haftarah. We're not exactly sure when or where the practice of the Haftarah began. However, the general consensus is it was the rabbinic response to a decree not allowing us to have a public reading of the Torah. And so, therefore, they substituted a reading from the Nevi'im that would somehow remind us of, fill in the gaps left by our not reading the Torah that Shabbat. In Babylonia, where the age-old custom of completing the Torah in the annual cycle, the one that we practice, was already firmly in place, the Haftarah that was chosen was always something thematically related to the Torah reading that was supposed to be read that week. So, for instance, the week of Parashat Naso, when one of the things we read about is the law of the Nazir, we read the story in Shoftim about Shimshon being dedicated as a Nazir, as an example. In Eretz Yisrael, where there was a very different tradition, and they read the Torah over the course of 3.5 years and read much smaller sections each week, the Haftarot that they selected were selected based on the first significant word from that section of the Nevi'im being the same or similar to the first word of the Torah reading that they were missing that week. In any case, we find that, that the rules of the Haftarah are already laid out for us here in the Mishnah. As you can see in the Mishnah, Masechet Megillah, it tells us that On Monday and Thursday, we have 3 aliyot. On Rosh Chodesh and Chol HaMoed, we have 4 aliyot. And on those days, ein maftirin b'navi, as you can see in red. However, on Yom Tov, we have 5 aliyot. Yom Kippur, we have 6 aliyot. Shabbat, we have 7 aliyot. And maftirin b'navi, we do have the Haftara. Notice it doesn't say what we're supposed to read. Just as we read from the Nevi'im. Maftirin means that we conclude, like ein maftirin achar Pesach, afikoman, the final thing. There are a few rules that are given in the Mishnah, including the suggestion that we not use the first chapter of Yechezkel, the vision of the chariot with all of its mystical associations, not use it as a Haftarah. As you can see here, Rabbi Yehuda permits it. And Rabbi Eliezer is of the opinion that we do not read the 16th chapter of Yechezkel. If you take a look at it, you'll see why it's quite frightening and quite upsetting. We don't use it as a Haftarah. So these are some guidances. You can see in the Tosefta, also from the 3rd century in Eretz Israel, you can see that there are particular Shabbatot where there are set Haftarot. So the 4 Shabbatot that we have before Pesach, the 4 Shabbatot basically in the month of Adar, the Haftarot are listed. We read the Parsha of Shkalim, and the Haftarah is about donating the Shkalim in the times of Yehoyada. The second one is Zachor, about Amalek. The Haftarah is from Shaul and Amalek. The third one is Paraduma, and the Haftarah is from Yechezkel, about purifying us, Zarakti Alechem Mayim Torim. And the fourth is HaChodesh Azalachem, and the Haftarah is from a passage in Yechezkel about Rosh Chodesh Nisan. But you notice that besides that, there are no particular texts used. There are some rules used. So, for instance, in the next paragraph in Halacha Yod Chet, here in the 3rd chapter of the Tosefta Megillah, Eim naftirin banavi atem mishlosha psukim bekerach achad. So you don't read if there's more than 3 psukim in one chunk. Imaita parsha shel arba'a v'shel chamisha reza kored kula. But if it was 4 or 5, then you read the whole thing. You don't break it up. Hamakatzer reza mishubach. Reading fewer psukim is better. Notice there's no set text. Imaita parsha ktana kigon kichol ma'adonai chinam nimkartem v'lo b'chesav tikailu. Sometimes you'll have a parasha, a paragraph, which is one pasuk. This is in Yeshayahu Nun Bet. You read that by itself. Medalgin banavi ve'in medalgin batorah. You're allowed to skip around in the book of Nevi'im. So to read from, let's say, the beginning of Yirmiyahu and skip to a later part of Yirmiyahu, you have to go in forwards direction. Ve'in medalgin banavi, but you can't skip from, let's say, Yirmiyahu to Yechezkel, even if they're in one scroll or one book. But we may skip around in the Shnei Masar, as long as you don't skip from the end to the beginning. You have to go in a forward order, which is why the custom in many communities is on Shabbat Shuvah to read from Hosea, and then the next book Yoel, and then 4 books later from Micha, to go in that order and to read the Haftarah in that way. Now, you'll notice again that there's no set text, but what happened is that over the course of the next few centuries after the Tosefta, particular texts became popular to use for Haftarot for particular occasions, including for Shabbat Chatan. There are particular texts from near the end of Yeshayahu that was used, and particular Haftarot that were used if Shabbat Rosh Chodesh Av, if Rosh Chodesh Av fell on a Shabbat, they would have a particular text that they would use. And as happens with all customs, over time, the texts became more fixed. However, that really only happened after communities had already emigrated in different directions, such that the Aleppo custom and the Tunisian custom, the Moroccan custom, the German custom, the Eastern European custom are all different. And in many cases, there's multiple choices, shall we say, or multiple texts that are used, not all of them, but different texts that are used as the Haftarah on a particular Shabbat. So our job over the course of this year is weekly to take a look at the Haftarah, to look at the broader book of that section of Nevi'im, what it's about, what the role of this Haftarah, the message of this Haftarah is, and why it ended up being selected as the Haftarah for this particular parasha, what its connection is with the parasha. And hopefully we will be able to hear the voice of the Nevi'im echoing through the generations, reminding us of our connection to the Torah and strengthening the message of the Torah, which of course was always the job of the Nevi'im. I want to wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom and a year of Limud Torah Poreh, a fruitful and exciting year of study of Torah together.